Okay, I think we have everyone here today. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second breakfast seminar of the semester. Today, if you have any technical support, we have Elisa. You have all her details on the screen right now. So if you have any problems in hearing or if you're not able to see the presentation, please get in touch with her. Yeah, so let's begin. Today we have another group of namesakes. So we have Mia H and Mia Z today presenting to us about their work on key barriers of MaaS development. So both of them will present and then we will open it up for discussion, and both of them come from different backgrounds and different ideas and different learnings that they got from doing this work. I was also involved in this paper, which is why I'm saying that. So it would be really interesting for you to direct your questions to them and learn from what kind of lessons we've understood from interdisciplinary research. So the agenda for today is that they have about 35-40 minutes, so up till 9-10. They will work on their presentation, and then afterwards we'll open it up for discussion. We can also have a little bit of a mingle session in case the discussion ends early, where you can ask both Mia's a little more in detail or get in touch with them about their work. So that would be really nice. Just before we begin, I just want to say that we have more seminars coming up. Another interesting one would be the one we have planned in December. It's on electric roads. And we are putting together a really good team of different kinds of people with different kinds of backgrounds and what they have been working with. So it's going to be really, really interesting. It could be a panel one. So we would love for you guys to join us. And with that, I hand over the reins to Mia Z.
Thanks, Babna. Hope everyone see my screen fine. Yes, good morning, everyone. It's really nice to be here on this digital breakfast seminar. And I am Mia Z. Today we will present a work that jointly worked with Bhavna, Martin, Mia Hesseglin, and Anna Pnestor. So we are actually not only from ITRL, we also, Mia and Martin also from Department of Machine Design. So currently I work as a researcher at ITRL, and my research focus is on the new mobility solution and its system impacts related. I have been involved also in different MaaS related projects. So it's a really exciting work to work together with the team in an interdisciplinary manner. So now I will hand over to Mia to say a few words about herself.
Right. So I'm Mia H. Hesselgren. I come from a design background. Currently, I'm a postdoctoral researcher in design for sustainable mobility. I'm also a research program leader at ITRL for our research on mobility of people. And at Machine Design, I work in a group of integrated product development and design, where I'm responsible for the master program track, Industrial Design Engineering. Yes.
Thanks, Mia. So now I will begin, and then Mia will join me later on when we come to different perspectives. A little bit on the background. So the first question we want to ask is why MaaS? And some of you probably have heard many reasons behind. And what we want to re-emphasize today are two reasons. And first is the pressure that comes from the increase in urbanization. Even if timelines could be collapsed and resources would be plentiful in the future or currently, and there is very little appetite for us to turning cities into more parking lots than they are today. People want to make the city more livable and more sustainable. Second is the mega trends increase in the transport demand. The supply side of transportation actually need to add more variability to enable people, not only mobility of people, but also mobility of goods to be faster, cleaner, and less expensive than the current. Therefore, among the sustainable mobility solutions, MaaS stepped onto the stage with the potential of providing flexible, efficient, and seamless mobility solutions based on shared services. But if you can pay attention, I use potential because with these mentioned potentials, MaaS has no doubt drawn attentions from different sectors and different stakeholders that are interested to test the potentials and try if MaaS has the promised effects. For example, MaaS Global view MaaS as an innovative operating model generating user-centric mobility and freight services based on a seamless, cooperative, and sustainable transport ecosystem. And also UITP, they regard MaaS as the integration of and access to different transport services. And these are mainly based on the stable and efficient public transport. But no matter which descriptions, and of course there are many other descriptions and definitions and views from different other sectors, the core of MaaS is to enable a single digital platform to integrate end-to-end trip planning, booking, e-ticket, and payment services that across all modes of transportation. So now I'm gonna have a turn because there will always be a however. So while MaaS may create a new system of personal mobility for person and for goods, it's still at a very initial stage. So which means in theory, there are various MaaS models, but in reality, few MaaS pilots are actually available. Which means that is really hard to have a structured evaluation based on the limited data to identify the uncertainties and the barriers that are behind the MaaS development and implementation. However, the knowledge on uncertainties and the barriers are very, very important because it can support necessary integration between public and private transport services for enabling MaaS. It can help citizens utilize MaaS for more efficient and accessible travel. It can support MaaS providers and operators in developing sustainable business models. And it can also support authorities in MaaS-related policy making. So the uncertainties and the barriers links tightly together with the potentials that we have just mentioned. So given the importance of identifying barriers and uncertainties, we actually found only a few studies have attempted to review the barriers of the MaaS that are related. And among those studies, they are primarily focused only on one perspective. But considering the complexity of MaaS, involvement of different disciplines and the consideration of different perspectives are necessary. It is also very, very essential to look at the interrelationships of the identified barriers, if there are any, due to the systematic nature of MaaS. So specifically in our work, we actually did not go to very broad of different MaaS or in a very general sense. We actually consider a variation of MaaS model, the CMaaS model. So what does CMaaS mean? CMaaS, it means corporate mobility as a service. So before MaaS, we put the corporate there. So the concept of CMaaS is basically defined and also defined by work that main authored by Mia as well. And it's a MaaS system owned or commissioned by a corporation, obviously a company. And this MaaS system, it focused on the transport within, to, and from a work site. So the users of the service, which means are the people working at or visiting the site of the company or the corporation. So now you can see, although CMaaS feels like it's mainly under the context of a company, but actually we believe it fulfills the main characteristics of MaaS with no doubt. And the knowledge that we think acquired from the CMaaS model of the barriers can also be used for identifying barriers in a more general sense for more general MaaS or other variation of MaaS models. So with all that said, we acknowledge the importance of an interdisciplinary approach by considering 4 perspectives, which are service design, short as SD. So later on, I will just use the short term for the perspectives. Business model, BM, user travel attitudes and behavior, TRA and B, system impacts, SI. As it's illustrated here to the right figure, if you can see clearly, these 4 perspectives focus on different phases in actually more like a chronological order on the horizontal dimension. And so SD mainly focus on the development phase, but it has extensions throughout the process actually. So the business model perspective is mainly applicable in the implementation phase, while travel attitude and behavior is mainly considered in the operation phase. And for the system impacts perspective, it's mainly relevant in the follow-up phase. So although they have their main focus in different phases from the horizontal dimension, they actually also support each other and give inputs to each other in the system as a whole. So then this forms the system as a whole. On the vertical dimension, if you can say, the four perspectives can actually be connected to 3 different levels, which are the individual level, the organizational level, and the societal level. So now you can see like SD, it connects to all 3 levels since it considers the user needs, the company's capabilities, and also the societal's requirements. So this is also corresponding to the from the horizontal dimension. BM connects to the organizational level since it reflects the company's business model change in providing and operating the CMaaS system. And travel attitude and user behavior connects to the individual level, which is quite straightforward because it reflects the user change in work-related travel due to access to a CMaaS, but maybe not only work-related travel. And also the system impacts perspective connects to the societal level since it reflects what impacts the CMaaS could have on the users, on the company, and on the city or regions that's extended outside of the company. So with that said, we want to answer mainly 2 research questions. The first one is what barriers to the development and implementation of CMaaS can be identified by investigating a real CMaaS pilot using the 4 perspectives. The second is how do these identified barriers relate to each other in the system across these 3 levels, the individual, organizational, societal level of the real CMaaS pilot. So now you can see there is one thing about the real CMaaS pilot. So what do we mean about the real CMaaS pilot? Yes, so our analysis based on a real pilot that is conducted through a project, which is SMSS, Sustainable Mobility Services Certified. So it's actually within the corporation of Scania. So the services included 3 internal taxis, 14 small shuttle buses, and 40 shared e-bikes within the company area, as well as 6 commuter buses for commuting to and from the city. So the system actually aiming to provide for all these employees, which is around 14,000 employees that working, that distributed in 70 different buildings. And the shuttle buses, they cover an area that span about 5 kilometers from the north to the south and around 2 kilometers from the east to the west. And this is operated through 3 routes with approximately 20 stops. And the e-bikes are provided at 4 stations. The commuter bus has 2 stops in the city and has about 9 stops within the company. So they can get off at those stops. The services also has a digital platform mainly for the operation part. And also it has a mobile application for the users, which is in the center, which the name is Scania Go. So the service is still running, and probably there are some changes due to the influence of the COVID-19, but it's not like during the project, after project end and its end, so it's still there up and running. So with that said, following the methods that I have just presented and applied to the real CMaaS pilots that you are seeing here, so actually we have identified barriers from the 4 perspectives. So now I will hand over to Mia, and she will go over for the barriers that identified from the service design and the business model perspective. Please, Mia.
Right. So when we considered this CMaaS, this mobility service system, from a service design perspective, and as you saw in one of the previous slides, you could see how the service design perspective actually covers both individual, organization, and societal level. What we found, and from this perspective, we conducted about 77 different interviews with employees, and we did this in 4 iterative rounds. And firstly, what we found was that there were difficulties for the company to view and to develop the CMaaS as a complex socio-technical system. It was fine to develop it as a service system, but also considering how this, you could say, technical system was integrated with people, and the socio system was a much more complex task. And what we saw was that there were actually also, you could see it, you could consider it as even conflicts for employees to use the CMaaS, while at the same time following company policies and company norms. For example, being time efficient and using your time, your work time efficiently was found, it was found difficult to say, I use the CMaaS while at the same time I should feel that I'm being time efficient at work. So this was a barrier for employees to actually use the CMaaS. Also, the departments that were engaged in developing this, the test that we did, to really make an integrated effort when developing the CMaaS here was found really difficult. So there were several different departments involved, but for them to be truly working together, it was super tricky, super difficult. And also what we found, and this we actually also pointed out in a previous publication, which you see the reference to here below, was that with the CMaaS not being able to be connected, fully connected to public transport because of taxation issues, from the people's perspective, the employees' perspective, and using the system fully, this turned out to be a barrier. So if the shuttle bus stop would have been placed right next to where the commuter trains stop, there would be a risk of the whole CMaaS being subsidy for taxation, for förmånsbeskattning, for this whole system, which the company did not want to risk. And therefore, the stop for the shuttle bus was located a few hundred meters away from the commuter train station. So connecting the different levels here, the societal with the individual, this actually turned into a barrier. Also, on a more detailed level, considering the design of the service system, there was actually no planning function in the service platform to begin with, which so the users could not be assisted to plan their workday and travel beforehand, which was something that the employees had done previously. And the service system was a lot more built on go now function. And then this was definitely considered a barrier for users. So if we then go to the business models perspectives, so what we did here was that we did 10 interviews, semi-structured interviews with different organization representatives, at least at different parts of the organization. And what we also have master thesis produced here. You see the reference here below. So what we looked into was to see, and if perhaps we start with the bottom point here, that creating a suitable, flexible service, there was really difficulties here in terms of how the company managed to produce the flexibility that employees really needed. And this made the value proposition actually a bit weak. And then if we go up, the inability to handle the whole complexity of CMaaS, which is what was also identified in the previous, like the complexity of seeing the CMaaS not only as a service system, but also as a socio-technical system. So here, this limited actually the value creation and how the CMaaS could have been. And to be able to capture the value of the CMaaS was sort of limited, because integration between the different departments such as HR, such as operations, such as communications, with a lack of integration here, the capturing the value or the values that could have appeared was only limited. So we go further on to the other barriers that we identified. Mia? You're muted.
Thank you, Mia. Yes, that was really well covered on the barriers that we have identified on the service design perspective and business model perspective. And just now, Mia has also mentioned like what are the main methodology that has been used for in those two perspectives, and there are extra other work that can support for the work that we identify the barriers. So similarly for the barriers that identified from the users' travel attitude and behavior perspective. So these are based on a survey that is sent out to the employees through the HR department in the Scania. And there are actually 3 waves of survey. And this work is mainly based on the first and second wave of survey. And the first is before the launch of the Scania Go service, and then about 5 months after the launch of the survey. So they can compare the changes of the users' attitudes and the travel behavior. And then there is class or group that has been identified, which are car-oriented people or car-oriented employee, and shared mobility service oriented employee. But among those that we have found mainly 3 barriers. So first is that the requirement between users and the service provider were unsynchronized, because for the users, they view the system to be more powerful and can have more functions and more services could enable their travel within and to and from work. But this also becomes a fundamental barrier that initiated to the other 2, or mainly the second one, which is the flexibility and accessibility of the provided CMaaS were limited. So if you still have remembered when I described the system of the service, there are shuttle bus, taxis, e-bikes, and also the commute bus. But then the stops and the routes are kind in a limited way, and also the timetable is fixed. Although for this, there is the taxi services is more flexible and can have on demand, but those are actually not targeted for all the employees. Usually it's meant for the visitors that comes to the campus. And the third is that there are no incentives for the users to change travel attitudes and behavior. And also, of course, due to this, the planning, and also it requires time for the users to change the travel attitudes and behavior. So we found okay, so people, they actually need more incentives and time to change their attitudes and behavior in this new service, in facing these new services. And for more detail, you can go to this work that Juan and Yusak and Johnson has authored, and this is also Juan was in the SMSS project team as well. So now let's move on to the barriers that I identified from the system impacts perspective. So to enable this identification barrier, we have referred to a previous work that is already being published, and also Bhavna has given the presentation on this one. And this one is based on the 3rd wave of the survey that's sent out to the employees. And also this survey was conducted approximately 1 year after launch of the service. And at this perspective, we also identified 3 main barriers. So first is that the impacts on the user travel beyond the company context could not actually be investigated because this was not linked to the travel outside the company. So if you remember what when Mia presented the other 2 perspectives barrier, so there was a barrier related to the not linking to the public transport outside because of the taxation issue. So those has becomes a kind of a reason that the travel outside is not easy to be captured, or maybe in this case we can say impossible here. And also the second barrier is that impacts on the business potential values were underrated and made it very difficult for the company to promote the services to other companies. And this is actually another thing that links to the barriers that we identified from the business model perspectives. And the third one is it's more on the societal level. The impacts on the society were very weak and made it difficult for the city to acknowledge the benefits or the potentials of this CMaaS CMaaS perspective. And now you can say that this system level, a system impact perspective, it's also linked to the different levels, and it also reflects back upon to the other three perspectives. So now it shows like why we see in the beginning, the methods part, that these four perspectives, they link to each other, they give inputs to each other, and they form as a whole system. So now with all these barriers that identified, we actually have answered the first research question, if you remember. So now to answer the second question, we actually need to map these identified barriers into the individual, organizational, and societal level. And also you can see this is not a necessity, but it comes to like a very natural thing to conduct for the next step. Because we can see that for all these different type of barriers that identified from the different perspectives, that they are not only linking to one individual level or one societal level. So now we break out this horizontal or vertical dimension in the first figure, and now we put it in this manner. So then you can see actually there are like some barriers, or we can say like sub barriers, that they belong or mainly fall into one specific level, because they are more linking to, for example, the users or the companies, or beyond the company boundary. But as you can see, like from the service design perspective, it actually covers all these three different levels. And now it again confirms in the beginning of our method part, when we have those figure, that we believe the service design should cover the different phase of the MaaS development and implementation. And also it comes to the it reflects the user needs, the company business model, and also what comes to the society change. And of course, from the system impacts perspective, and there are barriers that we can find that some, for example, the first main barrier, it covers all three levels as well. And also there are barriers covers to the organizational level and the societal level. So now you can see that all these barriers, they not only focus on their own phase of the CMaaS development and the implementation, but also it's reach beyond to the other levels, and also that you can see some of the barriers. It's not only linking, or if you remember, like before this slide, the link between them, or the reason for this barrier actually has some link to the barrier that identified from another perspective. So which means this mapping now we're showing here not only shows how the barriers found through this interdisciplinary approach cover all three levels, but also it starts to trigger some speculation from us. So we start to asking us further questions. So are there patterns showing how the barriers relate to each other? So now they're just on different level, but is there any link between them? Could there be a hierarchical, for example, relationships among these identified barriers, or maybe other type of relation? And then these questions or these speculations so further stimulated us to further examine how these barriers could be interrelated to hinder the development of the system and the implementation of the system. So that's why we take a further look. And then we found actually from all those barriers that under the 4 perspectives, 3 barriers can be regarded as influential barriers. For example, SD1, SD3, and TRA and B1 here. So now we have put these links in the mapping and try to see, okay, so how are they linked together and interrelated with each other? I will not go to very detail of all the figure, so just give you some example. For example, the limited scope of the CMaaS that originated from SD1 here, it comes to an influence, or it made it difficult to provide a level of flexible and accessible services that fulfill the travel needs of the employees, which we can see from the SD1 to the TRA BN2. I think you cannot see my mouse is moving, but now you can see the direction from the SD1 to TRA BN2. And the second influential barrier, which is TRA BN1 here, it caused SD2 from this direction. So the reason is that the unsynchronized requirements between the users and the service provider, it likely triggered conflicts for the employees to use CMaaS, while at the same time following the company's policies and norms. So there is this barrier is also made it very more difficult to check the impacts on the, on the user travel beyond the company's context at the societal level. So which is the other link that you can see here from the TRA and B1 to the SI1. So the last example is about the third influential barrier, SD3. It caused BM1, the business model perspective, the first one. So the reason is that the weak connection and cooperation caused certain problems for the company in identifying those business model or business values through the application and the development of the business models that could suit for this CMaaS, development and implementation at the organizational level. Actually, if you can see, apart from this thick black line, there are some like diminished kind of like green line, maybe very difficult to see, but these are actually another relationships that, in addition to this hierarchy relationships that we identified and we think could be interesting to further look, because there were also relationships between the barriers within a single level, for example, within the individual or within the societal organizational level. And as you can see, like within the individual level, from the travel attitude and user behavior one, the 2 and 3, they are influencing to each other. And within the organizational level, all these 3, BM1, 2, and 3, they very likely to form a loop that they influence to each other, because it's from value creation, proposition, and identification. So, okay, now we are finished with this kind of complex figure. And then to the end, with all these 2 questions answered, what have we learned? Because we did see like lessons learned from this identification barriers. So we think that incentives and strategies are needed for individuals to change travel attitudes and behavior in order for the development and implementation of CMaaS to be continually successful, not just a one-time thing. So in the long term, continuous experimentation and learning are required. A company needs to review the system's social inclusiveness in order to further develop a complex socio-technical system. And this will conquer to, for example, the unsynchronization and also the conflict between the employees and the provider. In addition to the cross-functional integration between these departments, integration for example, with the society outside the company need to be developed and operated in a sense. And that also, which means like maybe it needs a better synchronization and also better cooperation with other transport options beyond the company's geographical boundary. Why is that? Because in the end, when it comes to the societal level, it is very crucial to support the establishment of a long-term sustainable and beneficial transport solution that from the company to the society that beyond. Okay, so last but not least, so there are 3 main takeaways we want to emphasize. So first, also like corresponding to the beginning, so why are we choosing this very specific CMaaS model? And so although like it could be argued that CMaaS may be a limited sandbox version of MaaS, but it shares the specific responsibilities, certain specific responsibility within a larger MaaS system. And it can help to enable accessible, flexible, and customized mobility services to reach the potential of the more sustainable mobility. It's also necessary to not only identify barriers interdisciplinarily and systematically, which we did here in this work, but also to capture some possible relationships between the barriers. So which also we did in the further look, but definitely there are more work lying behind to look into the relationships. And the last one is in order to design, develop, and implement a well-functioning service system, it is important to view CMaaS and also will not CMaaS, but also MaaS as a complex socio-technical system. It is also essential to integrate the needs of different stakeholders, different sectors, and include the needs of the end users and enable the evaluation of the system impacts. So this work has been accepted and the publication is in progress for the Journal of Transportation Research interdisciplinary perspective, which will reflect our interdisciplinary and systematic work. And of course, we hope this work can establish, for example, some kind of channel to encourage further discussion and continuous investigation of barriers within MaaS system. And that is one of the main purpose. And which means other perspectives could be added and more insights can be sparked, hopefully, in order to promote MaaS to reach the potentials in providing smart and sustainable mobility solutions. So with that said, we come to the end. And thank you so much for your attention. If you have more questions, you can ask now and we can have more discussion. And you can also find our contact info here if you want to reach out in the future. Thank you.
Great. Thank you to both Mias. Before we start the discussion, I just want to quickly highlight that I would really encourage the participants and the speakers to hold back a little bit towards the end so we can get some feedback for this seminar. And now for the questions. Are you guys ready? I'm gonna quickly read out the questions for you, or if the participants are interested, you could also use the raise hand feature so we can let you ask your own questions as well. We have one question from Rami. Could you please further explain why value capture was difficult? What customer segments existed for the CMaaS pilot in Södertälje?
Mm-hmm. So should I talk about that? Mia,
Yeah,
do you want to stop sharing the presentation?
Yes, I will.
So then we can see more people. Maybe
Here.
I can see Rami. I don't know if I see Rami. No.
No, I'm not visible today.
No, you're not. You're invisible. Okay. So in terms of customer segments, I wouldn't say that we talked about it as customer segments actually, but there were employees, rather, the employees at Scania And then you can, of course, think about that there are different categories of employees. So there could be those that move around a lot during their daytime while at the campus, whatever, at Scania in the office. That's one, you could say, segment, one type of user group. And then there would be another category would be perhaps those who do not move around so much. And then when we looked at from the employee perspective, the user, we also looked at segments that were more car oriented and more shared mobility oriented. So I think like here, it's not really appropriate to talk about it as customer segments, but more as different types of user groups and different types of practices or attitudes or behaviors. In terms of capturing the value, one of the things that was really difficult was for the different departments involved to be truly integrated, and therefore to also then decide what kind of value is it that we should capture with such a system. So it could be that providing this service system would be something that could be considered a value as an employer, simply bringing a better workplace. So that could be a value, but then it could also be financial value, and it could be environmental value. So by having a well-functioning service system here, could Scania reduce carbon dioxide emissions? So there are many different possibilities for value, capturing value, but it was tricky to work out how to synchronize this. If that, does that answer your question, sort of? Or
yeah, yeah, thank you.
Right.
Right, and then we have Albin. Thanks for the interesting presentation. Related to the barrier SI2, you say that the system business value was underrated. What actors valued it too low? And what is your evidence argument for that business value is higher than their valuation?
I think I sort of touched upon this when I just answered no, but I don't know. Mia, do you have anything else to add there?
No, I think this what you just answered to Rami's question, actually will touch upon this. But also I want to maybe just add one thing is that so what actors, so we would say like, okay, so probably these are the main service provider or more from this operational team, and that's from the Scania, because if you remember, like in the business model and also in the service design part, especially the first barrier that we identified from the service design is that the company, they fail to view this CMaaS service as a complex socio-technical system. So which means from the beginning, they restricted themselves to actually reach to the value that could be created, like Mia had just mentioned. So not only from the business perspective, but also like, for example, for the CO2 emission and also other impacts that could have. And another thing is due to that, they actually wanted to promote their service to other companies that beyond Scania, but it's very difficult since they also gonna face the same question from the potential buyer. Is like, okay, so how the system should function as like because it's very complex in the sense. So it feels like they tightened themselves from the very beginning. But at least that's how I perceive that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mia.
No, I think that's right. I think that's,
Great. Yeah, I hope that answered your question. Yes, so the other question is from Yusak. Incentive and grants always attract people's curiosity to try new solutions, but usually once the incentive is finished, so is the operation of the solution. Do you think there will be a serious monetary gain to be acquired by a private provider for this kind of solution, from this kind of solution? Or this should be something treated as a public good service, like a public transport service?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Yusak. That's a good question. If I can start, Mia,
yeah, please.
Fill in. So I think like serious monetary gain that could be gained from a Scania perspective in this case is actually the amount of land that is used to park private cars at the moment. If that land was turned into use to, for example, build more buildings or used in different ways, you could definitely put a monetary gain on removing parking places for the private cars, which is one side of this project, and that was sort of actually considered and looked at. However, it's not as easy as you can just say that this is a Scania profit thing, because the land then is integrated in the Södertälje municipality setting. So should a system such as this be treated as a public transport service? Well, it should certainly be linked to the private the transport service, the public service. And I think this was one of the really interesting findings here, that this sort of the lack of a true connection between the private and the public here is what caused for individuals frustration. We've also in another project looked at what's the case instead at, for example, Volkswagen in Wolfsburg, where there is a much closer connection between the operation of Volkswagen and the 70,000 people that work there, and the public of the municipality and the region of that. So how the CMaaS there is totally integrated with the public transport and the German trains, for example. So I think this could be a potential here to see it both as a private and public, but together, sort of as a system. Yeah.
Yes, I totally agree, especially like on the parking lot part. Actually, during the whole project, that from the operational and from the company side, they have been seeing that they are paying a lot for the parking part, and actually there are a lot of like money that linking to that. And that is one main side. But on another side that we actually did not touch in our study in this work is that you can also think about this potential link to the health welfare and also the work efficiency of the employees, because you do see like we have e-bikes, or they provide e-bikes in the system, which means the e-bike can be used, for example, just for lunch break, to the like activity center they have within Scania. So that is an enabler. And another thing is that if you pay attention, that we did not mention much on the private bike or the walking, like walk by foot. But actually those are also in the system. So if it can be well integrated on the digital platform, and for people to plan and book and for their route, and this could also be another like incentives, maybe not money related, but also like, so people can be more healthy, be more active, and also like the work efficiency could be increased. There are actually already studies related to this type of topic, but of course we need to look more into that. But I think those can be also linking to this like a private provider, and also can be a good like push for them to link better to the public transport that provided outside the boundary of the company.
Yes, Yusak, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, that's great, thank you.
Great. Any more questions? We're actually a little low on time, so I will quickly share my screen. Firstly, we would like to encourage you to register for the next seminar that's coming up. So Elisa will paste the link for both the feedback and the registration right now in the chat. So you could take a look at that. And we really value your opinion on these seminars we're doing, and it'll only help us make it better. So we would like to get your quick opinion on what you thought of it, how relatable it was to you. So please go ahead, and if you follow the link in the chat, you should be able to both register for the next seminar as well as give us some feedback. Yes. Beyond that, I would really like to thank you all for being here, and thank you to both MaaS for a super interesting presentation. I don't want to say like all the positive things because then I'm involved in this paper and I feel like, you know, tooting my own horn. But I really think that this was the most interesting piece of paper that we have worked on together, and I think both of you agree as well. And the outcome of it was very good, and I think it's very interesting to take it forward a little bit more and see what people perceive of this. So with that, I would really like to say thank you to all of you for joining us today, and hope to see you soon in the next seminar. And yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
For your time.